The night my brother got engaged, my father stood up at the dinner table, raised his glass, and said, "We finally have something to celebrate in this family." He looked right at me when he said it. I was 22. I had just been passed over for the third time in 4 years. No college fund, no car, no down payment help. My brother Kevin had gotten all of it, every single bit. And now he was getting a toast, a standing ovation from aunts and uncles I barely knew, and my father's eyes on me like I was supposed to clap along. I did clap. I don't know why. Muscle memory, maybe. Or just survival. That was 9 years ago. I'm 31 now. And I'm only telling this story because last spring, my mother called me for the first time since my father's funeral, which I didn't attend, and she said 4 words that made my stomach drop straight through the floor. "Kevin needs your help, but I'm getting ahead of myself." I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, middle class enough to know what we didn't have, comfortable enough to pretend we did. My father worked in insurance. My mother did bookkeeping part-time for a dentist's office, though she stopped when Kevin started high school because, as she explained it, she needed to be available for him, for his sports schedule, his college visits, his whatever. I was 2 years older. I had learned to make my own lunch by 4th grade. Kevin was the golden one. That's not bitterness talking. That's just the fact of our house. He was tall, athletic, charming in that easy way that made adults immediately like him. He played baseball through high school, got partial scholarship offers from 2 small schools, and my parents made up the difference without blinking. $40,000 over 4 years. I got a handshake and a "you're smart, you'll figure it out." I did figure it out. I worked at a Panera Bread through community college, transferred to University of Cincinnati on academic scholarship, graduated with a degree in accounting, and started at a mid-sized firm in Cincinnati 2 years later. I did all of that alone, with $17,000 in student loans, a used Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard, and exactly 0 help from anyone in my family. I'm not saying this to be impressive. I'm saying it because it matters later. Kevin's engagement party was a Saturday in October, held at my parents' house, which my mother had spent 2 weeks decorating. There were string lights in the backyard, a catered spread from a local Italian place, and a slideshow my mother had put together. 47 photos of Kevin growing up, 4 of which included me, and in 3 of those 4 I was blurry in the background. His fiancée was a woman named Beth. She was perfectly nice. I have nothing against Beth. She smiled at everyone, helped clear plates without being asked, and seemed genuinely happy. I liked her. I still do, actually, which made everything harder later. The evening was fine until after dinner. My father, who had been drinking since about 4 o'clock, stood up and tapped his fork against his wine glass. He gave a speech about Kevin, his determination, his work ethic, his bright future. He mentioned the baseball scholarship. He mentioned Kevin's new job in sales. He mentioned, for some reason, a camping trip they'd taken in 2009 when Kevin caught a 14-inch bass. Then he said, "Beth, you're joining a family that knows how to raise winners." He sat down. He did not look at me once during that speech. Not once. My aunt, my father's sister, who I've always found a little too loud and a little too eager to make everything into a performance, started clapping loudly, and everyone joined in. My mother was crying happy tears. Kevin pulled Beth into a hug. I sat there with a paper napkin folded in my lap, pressing it between my fingers until it tore. After the toast, when people had broken off into small groups and the backyard noise had risen again, my father walked past me on his way to the cooler. He paused, looked at me, and said, quietly, like it was just a throwaway comment, "You could learn something from your brother, you know. He's got his life together." I was 22 years old. I had a 3.8 GPA and was working 30 hours a week to afford textbooks. I said, "Okay, Dad," and I went home. I drove back to my apartment, 45 minutes, late October, windows down even though it was cold, and I sat in the parking lot for a long time. I wasn't crying. I was past crying about this stuff. I was just sitting there running the math on how many times a person is supposed to absorb something like that before they're allowed to stop. I decided that night that I was done, not dramatically. I didn't call anyone. I didn't send a letter. I just stopped making myself available, stopped showing up to things, stopped answering calls that went to voicemail without a message. My parents noticed eventually. My mother called in December to ask why I hadn't come home for Christmas, and I said I had plans, which wasn't true. I just didn't go. For the first year, there were sporadic attempts to pull me back in. My mother would text to say Kevin and Beth were coming to visit, as if that was an incentive. My father called once, around Easter, and when I picked up he just said, "Haven't heard from you," in a tone that made it clear he was waiting for me to apologize for something. I said I'd been busy. He said, We hung up. After that, the calls got less frequent. Then they stopped. I kept going. I got promoted. I started running 5Ks at first, then half marathons. I got a 1-bedroom apartment in Hyde Park with south-facing windows and a fire escape where I could sit with coffee on weekend mornings. I made friends at work, a few close ones. I dated someone for 2 years, broke up gently, stayed friends. I built something that felt, for the first time, like an actual life. My parents were not in it. Neither was Kevin, really, though we exchanged occasional texts, birthdays, holidays, nothing substantial. He knew something had shifted. He never asked about it directly. My father had a heart attack in November, 6 years after I'd quietly stepped back. He died 3 days later at Kettering Health, with my mother and Kevin at his bedside. I found out from Kevin's text, "Dad passed this morning. Mom is a wreck. Funeral is Saturday." I read that message sitting at my desk at work. I read it 3 times. I put my phone face down and finished a spreadsheet I was working on. Then I went to the bathroom, ran cold water over my wrists, and looked at myself in the mirror for a minute. I felt sad, not devastated. Sad. There's a difference. Sad for the version of things that never happened, for the father I'd wanted and hadn't had, for the conversation we never got to have because he never thought we needed to. I didn't go to the funeral. I sent my mother a card, just a card with a short note that said I was sorry for her loss and that I hoped she had support around her. I meant it. I mailed it the same day. Kevin called twice. I let it go to voicemail both times. He didn't leave messages. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought the story was over. 16 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon in April, my phone rang with a number I recognized but hadn't seen in years. My mother's cell. I almost didn't answer. I was standing in my kitchen making dinner. Pasta, nothing fancy, and I stood there watching the phone buzz on the counter through 2 full rings. Then I picked it up. "Hi, Mom." She sounded tired. Older. She said she hoped I was doing well. I said I was. There was a pause where I could hear her gathering herself. Then she said it. "Kevin needs your help." I put down the wooden spoon I was holding. I said, "What kind of help?" She explained. Kevin and Beth had been having financial trouble for about 1.5 years. Kevin had lost his sales job. His whole regional division had been cut in a restructuring, and he'd been freelancing since then, but the income was inconsistent. Beth was working, but they had a mortgage and a 2-year-old, and the savings were nearly gone. They were looking at possibly having to sell the house. My mother's voice, as she said all of this, carried something underneath it that she would never name out loud, the assumption that I would help, that this was why she was calling, that of course, obviously, this was something I would do. I was quiet for a moment. Then I asked, "Why are you calling me?" She said, "Because you're his sister." I said, "I know, but why are you calling me specifically? Does Kevin have money saved that he's asking me to match? Is there a family fund I don't know about? Did everyone chip in and now it's my turn?" She said, "Honey," I said, "because I remember being 20 years old and asking Dad if I could borrow $2,000 to cover a semester when my financial aid got delayed. Do you remember what he said?" Silence. I said, "He said to figure it out." And I did. I waitressed on top of my other job for 4 months. I figured it out. My mother said quietly, "That was a long time ago." I said it was, and now Kevin needs help. I understand that. I genuinely feel for Beth and the baby, I do. But I need you to understand that I spent the first decade of my adult life being told I was on my own, that I didn't need help, that I was smart and I'd figure it out. So I did. I built something. And now you're calling me to hand part of that over to someone who got every advantage I didn't. Because what? Because family? My mother started to cry. Soft, quiet crying that I recognized from childhood. The kind she did when she felt like a situation was getting out of her control. I didn't hang up. I let her cry for a moment. Then I said gently, because I wasn't trying to be cruel, "I love Kevin. I hope he gets back on his feet. But I'm not able to help with money." "I'm sorry," she said. "He's your brother." I said, "I know." She said, "Your father would have wanted." And I stopped her there, not rudely, just firmly. "Mom, please don't." Another silence. Then she said something I hadn't expected. She said, "I know we weren't always fair to you." I sat down at my kitchen table. The pasta was overcooking on the stove, and I didn't care. I said, "What?" She said, "I know it. I've known it for a long time. Your father, he had a way of seeing things, and I went along with it, and I should have." She trailed off. "I should have pushed back more. You were always capable. We didn't always show you that we knew that. I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't, fully." It wasn't an apology exactly. It was something adjacent to one. Something worn and late and imperfect. I said, "Thank you for saying that." She said, "I mean it." I said, "I know." We were quiet for a while. Then I said, "I can't give Kevin money. But if he wants to talk about job searching, resumes, how I got through the lean years, I'll take his call. I'll actually talk to him. But it has to come from him." She said she'd tell him. He called 3 days later. It was awkward at first. We hadn't really talked in years. And there's a particular kind of discomfort in a sibling conversation, when both people know there's a debt that can't quite be named. He didn't ask for money. I think my mother had prepared him. He asked how I was doing, and I told him honestly, and then he started talking about the job search, and I listened and gave him what I actually could. Real, practical, useful information about networking and sales, about contract work, about how to talk to a recruiter. We talked for an hour. Before we hung up, he said, "I don't really know what happened between you and Mom and Dad. You kind of just disappeared." I said, "I know. I needed to." He said, "Was it me? Did I do something?" I said, "No, not really. It was just the way things were, the way they treated us differently." He was quiet. Then he said, "I noticed that too, you know." I didn't say anything. I probably should have. I said, "Yeah, probably. We didn't resolve everything. You don't, in an hour after 9 years. But it was honest, and that mattered." Kevin found a job 4 months later, regional account manager for a medical supply company, good salary, solid benefits. He texted me when he got the offer. I texted back congratulations and a gif of someone during a little celebration dance. He sent back 3 laughing emojis. My mother and I talk occasionally now, not often, not the way some people talk to their mothers, not texting every day, not sharing recipes, not that. But occasionally, she asks how I'm doing. I ask about her garden, which she's apparently gotten very into since my father died. Sometimes she mentions Kevin, sometimes she mentions Beth or the baby. I listen. She's never mentioned the engagement party. She has never mentioned my father's toast, or the way he used to walk past me like I was furniture, or the $2,000 I needed at 20 and had to scrape together alone. Maybe she doesn't remember it the way I do. Maybe she does and can't bring herself to go there. I've stopped needing her to. I live in Cincinnati still, in a bigger apartment now. 2 bedrooms, one that I use as an office. I run half marathons. I have a cat named Biscuit who is deeply convinced he owns the south-facing window. I have friends I've known for years, and a job I'm good at, and evenings that are mine to fill however I want. I have not forgotten what my father said at that party. I have not forgotten the specific way he looked at me, or rather, didn't look at me, while he listed everything Kevin had accomplished, everything Kevin represented, everything this family was supposed to be proud of. But I've stopped waiting for him to take it back. He's gone now, and the debt he owed me went with him, and there's nothing to do with that except carry it lightly or not at all. I'd choose not at all. My name is not on my brother's mortgage. My money is in my own account, in an index fund my father never would have thought to tell me about, growing quietly every month. I built that, every bit of it, and nobody helped me. That used to feel like the worst part of the story. Now it feels like the only part I need. I've thought a lot about what it actually means when someone shows you who they are and you keep showing up anyway. For years, that was me. I kept arriving at family dinners, kept clapping at the right moments, kept folding myself smaller so the room felt comfortable, and the room never noticed. That's the part nobody tells you, that the people doing the harm often aren't even aware of it. My father didn't think he was doing anything wrong that night. He genuinely believed he was giving a toast. The fact that it landed on me like a verdict wasn't something he ever sat with. I know that now. It doesn't make it hurt less, but it changes what I do with it. What I've come to understand is that neglect is its own kind of instruction. When you grow up being told, not in words but in every small daily action, that you are the one who figures things out alone, you eventually do. You figure things out alone. You get very, very good at it. That was the unintended gift in all of it. My father's indifference taught me a self-reliance that no amount of financial support ever could have. Kevin got the safety net. I got the muscle. And when my mother called 9 years later asking me to save him, I realized I was the only one in the family who actually knew how to land without one. That's not cruelty. That's just the math of how things compound over time. The hardest part wasn't the anger. I made peace with the anger a long time ago. Somewhere around mile 8 of my first half marathon. Somewhere in the parking lot of my first real apartment. Somewhere in the quiet of a Tuesday morning, when I realized I hadn't thought about my parents in 3 weeks. The hard part was the grief. Grieving the version of my father that only existed in the version of my childhood I'd wanted. Grieving the easy relationship with Kevin that we never quite had, because the house we grew up in made us into competitors before we knew what competition meant. When Kevin called me those few days after my mother did, he was sheepish and uncertain and more honest than I expected. He said he'd noticed how differently they treated us. He said he should have said something. I told him it wasn't his fault. He was a kid too, just playing the hand he was dealt, same as me. But I also didn't tell him everything was fine, because it wasn't, and pretending otherwise would have been the same old performance I'd been doing for years. What I gave him instead was something real, actual help, the kind that came from having done it the hard way, navigated unemployment, built from nothing, learned what actually works when there's no cushion beneath you. That felt right. That felt like the correct ending to a story that had spent a long time going in the wrong direction. I'm not waiting for a formal apology. My mother's quiet, "I know we weren't always fair to you" was imperfect and late, and probably as far as she'll ever get. I've decided it's enough, not because she deserves that grace, but because I do. Carrying a ledger of everything that was owed and never paid is its own kind of prison, and I've been free too long to go back in. My account is my own. My life is my own. And I built every bit of it.